Hi there, my name is Valentine, and I was affected by a series of discriminatory terminations from the General Secretary Training Program at the University of Missouri, Columbia, and I want to share my story. In my case, the program director stated in a letter dated 2/17/2016 that my termination was based on my milestone evaluation scores, which is summarized in the letter as shown here. Now, the milestones represent the combined evaluations of all the surgeons who teach you and evaluate your work as they work with you every day. There are 16 areas of competency, and each of them is evaluated on a scale of 0 to 4. And so supposedly I scored 1 in 2 areas, between 1 and 2 in 9 areas, and a 2 or higher in 5 areas. So that makes a total of 16. Now he screwed up the headings here. They don't really correlate with what he listed, but never mind, that's beside the point. I did not believe this summary when I saw it. I expected I would score 2 or higher in many more areas than just 5. So I went up to the program office and requested a printout of my detailed milestones from the database, and this is what I was given. This is the first page. Second page. Notice first of all that these milestones are dated 2/17/2016 as shown in the top left corner of each page, and so they were current as of the day he wrote a letter, and logically the scores here should match what he summarized in the letter. Now the scores are shown by these black spots that are plotted in these circles but lie beneath the detailed description for each level from 0 for critical deficiency to a maximum score of 4 at the extreme right. And so naturally, a trainee would advance through these scores, achieving or approaching a score of 4 by the end of the 5-year training program. And so in this area, for example, I scored there, that's between 2 and 3. And I placed these strings down the middle of each page, corresponding to a score of 2. That way we can easily tell which areas I scored 2 or higher, as would be shown by a plot at the level of the string or to the right of the string. So let's go ahead and count which areas I scored 2 or higher and compare with what he summarized in the letter. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 for the top one, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, so that's 12 out of 16, which is pretty good. And yet he stated in the letter I only scored 5 out of 16, which is pretty bad. So naturally I complained. After a couple of days I sent an email essentially stating that I scored 12 out of 16 and not 5 out of 16 like he stated in the letter. The very next day, on 2/29/2016, I got a response. I was emailed a second version of the milestones, which I have placed beneath the first version. That way we can compare them page by page. Now at first glance, you would notice that corresponding pages are identical except for the scores. Also notice that in the second version, the date is now 2/29/2016, as shown in the top left corner, compared with the 2/17/2016 we saw in the original version. And that's the good thing with electronic data. Every time you access or change anything, you leave behind a trail of timelines. So let's go ahead and compare them page by page and see which areas we changed. So here, the score remains the same. It was between 2 and 3 in the original version. It's still between 2 and 3 in the second version. Here there's an obvious change. It was between 2 and 3, which would have been here in the second version, but it's now here. That's between 1 and 2, so it's been decreased. The top one has similarly been decreased from there to there. The bottom one remains at the same place. Top decreased, bottom same. Top decreased, bottom same. Remains the same. Decreased, decreased. Top same, bottom decreased. Top decreased, bottom same. And this has been decreased. So if we now count the areas I scored 2 or higher in the second version, we're going to have 1, 2 for the bottom one, 3 for the bottom one, 4, 5 for the top one, and that's it. So 5 out of 16, just like he stated in the letter. So on 2/17/2016, my score was 12 out of 16. 12 days later, on 2/29/2016, it's been downgraded to 5 out of 16. So of course I wanted to know what could account for this radical decrease in my score within a 12-day period, and I got the most ridiculous response ever. He said the original version, the top ones, did not really belong to me, that they belonged to another trainee, and that my name and photograph were mistakenly pasted to this trainee's data. Of course, for the second time, I did not believe his story. I mean, this sounded like one of the elaborate cock and bull stories I would usually hear from my 4-year-old son when he's done something wrong. And my response was, if truly the original ones belonged to someone else, then they would match the milestones of whichever trainee it was they belonged to. A check was done and there was no match to anyone else's data, so he was just making stuff up. Now, he has been unable to sustain that ridiculous story and recently redacted it as false information. Now, there was a second evaluation, one whose results he could not change. This one is conducted by the American Board of Surgery and is administered to all trainees in the country every year. It is also the only evaluation that is actually predictive of which trainee eventually qualifies as a board-certified surgeon. And as you can see here, I scored a total of 80%, which plotted out to the 81st percentile in the country, which again is pretty good. In fact, it turned out this was the highest score in my class. And so think about this. At the exact midpoint of my training, with 2.5 years to go in a 5-year training program, I have 2 independent evaluations. In one of them, I topped my class, and yet the results of a second that had been in the database for weeks were suddenly downgraded from 12 out of 16 to 5 out of 16. And only when I pointed out that he wrote a sloppy letter that had no bearing whatsoever with the scores that were actually in the database. You know, I believe that when someone points out your sloppiness, the right thing to do is to fix your sloppiness. You don't get to fix my data to now match your sloppiness. That is just insanity, and it is cruel. And yet, this is not unique to me. It's been an ongoing problem in the program ever since he became program director. First of all, this program registered a 40% disapproval rating from among trainees, which was the highest in the country, and so disturbing it triggered an investigative visit from the National Accreditation Council. Secondly, his termination rates are by far the highest in the country. Trainees were terminated in 2012, 15, 16, and 17, and worst of all, every single one of those terminated was a minority, Black or Asian, in spite of the fact that, as expected, the program is predominantly white. And so, is there any evidence that white people by nature make better surgeons than minorities? And if not, how could a fair process exclusively terminate the handful of minorities and spare white trainees who make up the majority of the program? This does not make any statistical sense. And yet, thirdly, all of this is happening in a medical school that has already been threatened with loss of accreditation for not having enough minorities in the first place, for failing to sufficiently diversify. And this program director makes it his business to do the exact opposite, to terminate these same underrepresented minorities at the highest rate in the country. And in spite of all this, I pursued a grievance process with the university to no avail. In fact, to her credit, one official found wrongdoing. After reviewing the evidence and statistics from the investigation, she moved the case forward for equitable resolution per university policy that a reasonable person, based on the available evidence, would find the program director in violation of the university's anti-discriminatory policies. And yet above her, there was no subsequent restitution. And even when he admitted that the data he changed did not, in fact, belong to another person, they have not been restored to me, and I am still out of training. You know, from my experience, most white people actually hate racial discrimination. The problem is that most of us often get fixated on the small groups of degenerates like white supremacists, and we forget about the apparently nice guy, the intelligent guy, the wolf in sheep clothing who attains a position of authority and often blinded by his own self-righteousness to see his biases, then inordinately targets whatever group it is with adversity for several years and gets away with it. Why? Because, for example, he never says monkey or nigger to a black person, and he's not seen in any meetings chanting the slogans of Hitler, and yet his actions are far more devastating than any words he could have spoken. And the systems that are meant to stop these people do not do that, at least not in Missouri. We are still stuck in the 60s when it comes to several aspects of racial inequality. In fact, the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of People of Color, recently issued an advisory essentially advising minorities intending to come to Missouri that they do so at increased risk of adversity because of these endemic and worsening racial problems here. Another example is this lawmaker who was sued for racial discrimination, and while still defending that lawsuit, now sponsored a bill that increases the burden of proof of discrimination. And guess who supported the bill? The University of Missouri. And so, after trying for so many months to solve this internally to no avail, I feel obligated to go public. At least, I believe I should warn other people. If you plan to come here, you deserve to know what it is you're getting into. This is a university with a medical school that has already been threatened with loss of accreditation for failing to diversify in the first place. It has a program director who has been investigated for running the program with the lowest approval rating in the country and who has exclusively terminated the handful of minorities in the program for several years. And in my case, even when I topped my class in one evaluation, the second evaluation was now suddenly too good to belong to me and was downgraded from 12 out of 16 to 5 out of 16, as you saw, to now form the basis for my termination, and under the ridiculous pretext that the original scores belonged to another trainee. And the university considers these actions and statistics as normal, acceptable. Well, I don't, and most people don't. A university should be a place of excellence with standards that are fair and objective and transparent. There should be no place for any official to practice exclusion, data manipulation, or sloppiness for that matter. And when it happens, the university must step up and fix the situation. It's truly sickening when a university professes equal opportunity publicly, aggressively advertises for minorities, only to now go behind closed doors and tolerate the exclusive terminations of these same minorities, tolerate data manipulation, and support a law that then makes it harder for them to fight against discrimination. That's just hypocrisy. The consequences are devastating. Others have suffered in silence, but I will speak up. It may be a lofty goal, but I am determined that this ends with me. And so in that light, the second reason I'm publicizing this is because I need a lawyer who is well versed with things like this. Now, I know I cannot afford one at this time. Anyone familiar with medical education knows that, after medical school, you really have two things. You have a degree and you have a lot of debts. And until you finish residency, you cannot practice as a board-certified physician, and that's my situation. I feel like I've been left on a small island in the middle of the ocean. I got up this morning realizing I cannot even make my rent for the month. My children are at risk of homelessness because of this insanity and foolishness. No, Besides, they are black too. They should not have to grow up having to fight these same battles all over again. The evaluations of a trainee are what determine his progress, his graduation, and ultimately his capacity to earn a living in his chosen career. This is basic stuff. If my classmates get to keep their evaluations, I also get to keep my evaluations. That's what equality means. And equality is not negotiable. That's why black people and white people and all people have fought for racial equality all through the years. And things have gotten better. And that's why I cannot betray that progress. And finally, I need your support for a petition to the president of the university to restore my evaluations. That way I can at least finish my training elsewhere. Clearly, I should not have come here if I had known about these discriminatory statistics and bizarre actions. But basically, I still ask, what is wrong with being a person of color? How come statistically my chances of graduating are much less than those of a white person? Even when I top my class in the one evaluation that's actually predictive of eventual success, how come all of a sudden the results of a second evaluation now belong to an imaginary classmate? You know, it is true that all my classmates were white, but it's also true that none of them was imaginary. There was no ghost in my class. And so failing to sustain this fairy tale, why can't I have my evaluations back? Why? You know, every morning I look myself in the mirror and I have to ask the same question all over again. What is wrong with being black? Please support my petition here. And if you can help in any way at all, this is how you can get to me. Thanks for watching.